My husband Mark and I drove up to the place where my sister Lily was to have her wedding, and while he parked and turned off the engine, I caught myself feeling my heart beating strangely fast, not from excitement, but from some vague premonition. Although the day promised to be the most ordinary, filled with celebration and happiness, the envelope with $10,000, our wedding gift to Lily, was securely hidden in Mark's jacket pocket. I checked several times myself so that he hadn't forgotten it at home, because it wasn't just a gift, but a symbol of our support, our participation in her most important day. In addition, several months before, Mark and I had already contributed about a third of the total wedding expenses, and we weren't talking about small money. But Mark's job in an investment bank and my position as a marketing director in a large company allowed us not to count every penny and calmly spend it on those we love, especially since Lily was my only sister. And I always believed that if I were to really help someone, it would be her. When we entered the spacious hall, filled with soft light and the scent of fresh flowers, I immediately noticed my parents. Mom was standing with her back to us and doing something with Dad's tie. He was shaking his head and pretending to be slightly irritated, but I saw a barely restrained smile playing on his lips. They looked amazing, not just good, but radiant. There's no other way to say it. Mom's face was literally glowing. Her eyes were shining as if she was about to burst into tears of happiness, and Dad, usually tired and hunched over, was now standing straighter than usual and looked 10 years younger than he actually was. Something inside me turned over then, as if warm water suddenly became cold. I couldn't remember them looking like that at my wedding, which was only 5 years ago. No, they were nice, of course, polite, attentive, but not so filled with pride and genuine joy. I quickly pushed this thought away, deciding that now was not the time to stir up the past, because today was Lily's day, and it had to be perfect. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy! The ceremony, I must admit, was perfect. A quiet wind, the bride shining in a lace dress, and Jake, her groom, now her husband, who literally did not take his eyes off her, as if he was afraid that she would disappear if he blinked. I sat between my parents and Mark, holding his hand, trying to focus on the happiness of the day, on the music, on the rings, on the celebrant's voice. But inside there was still something stirring, strange, heavy, as if my parents' reaction had been somehow different, not the same as when Mark and I got married. After the ceremony, the reception began, cheerful, noisy, as it should be. We ate delicious hors d'oeuvres, drank wine, laughed, danced, until the moment came that I always dreaded a little at weddings, speech time. First came the best man, then the maid of honor with a touching story from college, and then my parents stood together, which in itself looked unusual, because they rarely did something like this together. My mother tapped her glass to get attention, and the room fell silent. We want to thank everyone who came to celebrate our beloved daughter's wedding today, she said, and there was something too pointed, too deliberate in the way she emphasized the word beloved, as if it was meant to be heard by me in particular. I shifted in my seat involuntarily, and Mark must have noticed, as he gently placed his hand on mine. My father continued, watching Lily grow into the beautiful woman she is today has been the greatest joy of our lives. She was always special. She always brought so much light into our home. I smiled, nodded, feeling the warm breeze in my chest suddenly turn into a heavy stone, and yet I tried to convince myself that perhaps I was being too sensitive. Of course they loved Lily, and they loved me, too, just in different ways, perhaps. Then Mom reached into her purse, and I noticed how she carefully pulled out some papers folded in half and began to unfold them, saying out loud, "Jake, Lily, your father and I want to give you something so that you can start your new life together with something truly special." She raised the papers above her head so that everyone could see them, and her voice suddenly became especially solemn. "We are giving you our family home as a wedding present." The hall literally exploded. There were gasps, joyful exclamations, then thunderous applause. Someone even cried out in admiration, and I froze. Next to me, Mark seemed to freeze, not moving. I looked first at my parents, then at Lily, expecting that at any moment someone would laugh and say that this was a joke, just a beautiful speech, nothing more. But it was not a joke. My parents beamed with pride, as if this was the most important and joyful moment for them in years. Lily didn't look surprised. On the contrary, she cried with happiness, clinging to Jake, who looked at his parents with his mouth open in amazement. My parents' house, the house with a mortgage that I had been paying off for the last 5 years, because my parents could no longer afford it after my father's hours were cut back, and my mother's arthritic hands did not allow her to work full-time. I tried to force a smile, even though my chest was tightening. Not once, did they mention giving this house to Lily. They didn't even ask me, and yet I was the one who had been paying for it all this time. "Tessa, are you okay?" Mark whispered, leaning towards me. "Okay," I answered through clenched teeth, still smiling, as Lily and Jake, beaming and dazzled, walked forward to embrace my parents amidst applause and cheers, and Mom and Dad reached out to them with a special warmth I realized I had never fully felt. I did my best to keep a smile on my face, to hide the way this moment had toppled something old and unhealed inside me, but after about an hour, when the joy of others began to feel like a heavy blanket thrown over me without asking, I realized I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't stay in that room, full of lights and other people's conversations and loud laughter, knowing that everything I had ever given away had now been given to someone else, without a word, without an explanation, without the slightest effort on my part. I found Mark at the bar, where he seemed to have sensed my inner tension for some time, because when he saw me, he immediately straightened up, alarmed. "Can we go?" I asked quietly, trying not to meet his eyes, so as not to burst into tears right then. He looked at my face, and that was enough. Without words, he simply nodded and said, "I'll take our coats." We apologized to a couple of mutual friends we met along the way. "Mark," we said, "had an early meeting, and we were terribly sorry, because the wedding was so beautiful, everything was so touching. Congratulations again. We will definitely call." We left before anyone could object too strongly. Although I noticed how my mother glanced in our direction with a slight bewilderment, as if she did not understand what was happening, the very second we got into the car, I burst into tears. It felt like the tears I'd been holding back all evening were spilling out with such force, as if a dam had burst inside me. "I can't believe they did this," I breathed through my sobs, burying my face in my hands as Mark silently started the engine. "I've been paying off this mortgage for 5 years. 5 years. And they didn't even tell me they were planning on letting me have the house." "Not a word." "I know," Mark said grimly, his eyes fixed on the road as we slowly pulled out of the parking lot. "It's unbelievable." "And Lily knew." "You saw her face, she wasn't surprised at all." "She knew," I repeated, wiping my eyes angrily, trying to control my voice, which was treacherous. "But it's not about the money." "I don't care about the money, Mark. That's not what I'm talking about. They could have at least talked to me, just explained, just asked." On the way home, memories crashed over me in a wave, one after another, as if someone had opened a long-forgotten drawer in my heart. All those times when my parents clearly favored Lily, when I was still trying not to notice it, not to attach importance to it, writing it off as circumstances. I remember when I graduated from college, they gave me a card and put $50 in it. I was grateful, because then I myself was barely making ends meet. And 2 years later, when Lily finished hers, they bought her a car, not a new one, not an expensive one, but still a car. It wasn't even the one she wanted, and she still got it. "It was my car," Mark chuckled, agreeing. "They just transferred it to Lily." "And dinner on my 21st, I continued, feeling the resentment flare up inside, fanned by the words. "They didn't come, they said they were tired, that it was too late." And then I found out they were going to Lily's volleyball game. Not even a championship, nothing special, just a game. The more I talked, the more examples came to mind, how they came to all of Lily's performances, but found excuses not to be at my concerts or presentations, how they told everyone about her successes, but almost never mentioned mine, how they once forgot about my bonus at work, even though it was my first time leading an international campaign, and then explained it by saying that Lily had a hard week. By the time we got home, I was exhausted, from tears, emotions, conversations, as if squeezed dry. Mark and I went upstairs in silence, and while I was changing into pajamas, he suddenly asked, trying not to look directly at me, "Where will your parents live now that they gave the house to Lily and Jake?" I shrugged, pulling on my sweater. "I have no idea, and honestly, it's not my problem anymore," I said, turning off the light and rolling over, trying not to think about the throbbing pain in my chest. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur. I went to work, came home, made coffee, sorted out paperwork, reviewed presentations, and tried hard to push everything about the wedding, the house, Lily, or my parents out of my head. I could feel a new emptiness brewing inside me, but I didn't allow myself to stop, afraid that if I stilled for even a minute, I would fall into it completely. And then one evening, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone rang. It was my mother. I stared at the screen for a second, hoping it was a mistake, but against my better judgment, I answered. "Tessa, dear," my mother said in the same tone, as if nothing had happened, as if the last 3 weeks hadn't passed in silence. "We're having a family dinner this weekend. Your sister and Jake are back from their honeymoon, and we'd love for you and Mark to join us." I wanted to say no. I wanted to hang up, forget about it, turn away, but some part of me, probably the stupid, hopeful part, suddenly whispered, "What if they explain? What if they apologize?" "Okay," I said firmly, "we'll be there." Saturday came too quickly. As we pulled up to the house, I noticed Lily's car in the driveway, parked next to my parents' beat-up sedan. We approached the front door, and I hesitated before ringing the doorbell. It felt weird not to use my key, but this wasn't my parents' house anymore, it was Lily and Jake's house. My mom opened the door with a smile, warm and genuine, like nothing had happened. "Tessa, Mark, come in," she said, and hugged me as easily as she always did, as if she hadn't given away the house I was paying for, or even discussed it with me. I hugged her back stiffly, trying to keep a calm exterior. Dad was in the living room with Jake, watching the game. He stood up when we came in, shook Mark's hand firmly, like a man, and gave me a quick, casual hug. "Where's Lily?" I asked, looking around the room where I always looked for my sister first. "Oh, she's changing the curtains in the dining room," Mom said casually, as if it were an ordinary matter. She had been doing repairs all week. My blood, my little sister, the one whose childhood I had protected, whose hair I had braided when my mother was in a hurry to work, whose school uniform I had ironed in the mornings because she never had enough time. And now she was standing on a stepladder in the house that I considered family, that I considered mine, changing the curtains as if these walls, this roof, this air had belonged to her all her life. It was getting on her nerves. It was really getting on her nerves. Only 3 weeks had passed since the wedding, and Lily was already rebuilding the house for herself, as if she had lived here for years, as if Mom and Dad had never lived here, as if she had not been a guest, but the hostess. Mark and I walked into the dining room where Mom had invited us, and there was Lily, in jeans, her sleeves rolled up, standing confidently on a stepladder, changing Mom's old blue curtains for some new ones, creamy, neutral, sterile, like a hotel. "Dinner's ready," Mom announced cheerfully, clapping her hands. "Everyone, sit down." We obediently took our seats, me between Mark and Dad, Mom across from me, Lily next to her, and Jake, leaning back in his chair at the end of the table like he owned the place. The food looked great, as always. Mom's special stew, with a mountain of side dishes, potatoes, salad, garlic bread, but I had no appetite. There was a lump in my throat, a knot in my stomach. The first 10 minutes at the table were filled with Lily's joyful chatter, interrupting Jake to recount their honeymoon in detail, the beaches of Hawaii, the sunsets, the hotel with the pool, the restaurant with live music, the chartered boat they spent the day on in the open ocean. I picked at my food, pretending to listen, nodding occasionally, and Mark, as if saving me from silent rage, asked pertinent questions to keep the conversation going. He always knew how to do that. Finally, when Lily finally stopped to catch her breath and pour herself a glass of wine, Mom cleared her throat, as she always did when she was about to get to the important part. "Okay," she said, folding her hands in front of her, "we wanted to talk to you about something, Tessa." I tensed, instinctively. "Well, as you know," she began with that feigned gentleness that always made my temple twitch, "we gave the house to Lily and Jake as a wedding present." "Yes, I noticed," I said evenly, not looking her in the eye. There was tension in the air, so thick you could cut it with a knife. My mother, as if she hadn't heard the cold harshness in my voice, continued, "The thing is, a young couple starting out together, they need their own space, their own life, their own comfort." I was silent, looking at my plate, waiting for her to finally get to the point. My father shifted in his chair, scratched his chin, and glanced at my mother. "What your mother is trying to say," he said awkwardly, "is that we can't live here with them, they need privacy." "I see," I said, not looking up. "I still don't understand what this is all about. So where are you going to live?" Mom and Dad exchanged glances, I caught Lily suddenly stop eating and start spreading mashed potatoes around her plate with exaggerated interest. Well, Mom began, carefully, as if she were treading on ice, we thought about it and decided to move into your vacation home. It's perfect for us, and it's in a quiet area, we'll be cozy there. I slowly, almost ceremoniously put my fork and knife down on my plate. The vacation home, as they called it, a small cottage, I had bought with my own money. Before I met Mark, I saved up for years, denying myself everything. I worked overtime, took shifts on weekends. It was my special place, my outlet, my territory of silence. Sometimes I let my parents come there, on weekends, in the summer, in the spring, when they wanted to be alone, but I never, not once, said that it belonged to them. Let's get this straight, I said evenly, trying to control my breathing. You gave away your house, the house I paid the mortgage on for 5 years, Lily, and now you think you're going to move into my vacation home without even asking me? Tessa, my father began, frowning, be reasonable, where else would we go? That's not my problem, I interrupted, feeling my voice grow harder. You had a house, you gave it away, without consulting me, even though I was paying for it, and now you expect me to just hand over my property to you? But you don't use it that often, Lily suddenly interjected, her voice soft, but with that note that always gave me goosebumps, condescending. Confident in her own right. I turned to her, no longer able to hide my anger. Are you serious? Are you talking about my property now? I bought this house, with my own money, I worked for it, and I decide who uses it. Mom turned pale, her lips trembled, and she whispered, you can't mean that, you don't say no? That's exactly what I'm saying, I said, looking straight at her. No, you are not moving into my vacation home, not now, not ever. The table fell silent, only the clock on the wall ticked quietly. Then Mom suddenly threw her hands up, her face scrunched up in hurt. How can you do this to us? She screamed, losing her composure, after everything we've done for you. We, your parents. Yes, I said calmly, almost hoarsely, and as my parents, you could have discussed this with me, just once, before you give away the house I paid for, before you try to take over my property. You have no right to refuse us. Mom screamed, raising her voice in the way she only did in the most critical moments, when she realized she was losing control. We have nowhere else to go, Tessa. Now you have your own home, you're secure, you're doing well. I had that house, I said flatly, gesturing toward the living room, that I paid the mortgage on for 5 years, but you gave it to Lily, so now it's up to you to decide where to live. Mom, not me. Lily suddenly slammed her palm down on the table, so hard that the forks on her plate jumped and she leaned back, rolling her eyes. Oh, God, Tessa. You're so cruel, so greedy. You've always been jealous of me. Always. Because Mom and Dad love me more, you always knew it. Always jealous of our relationship, because you were never that special. I looked at her, stunned by this sudden release of venom, unable to believe that these words had been spoken out loud, in front of my parents, without the slightest attempt to hide them. But then I suddenly felt calm, as if something had clicked inside me, and I turned to Lily with a cold clarity in my voice. If Mom and Dad love you so much, and you love them so much, then why don't you let them live here with you? It's a 4-bedroom house, Lily, there's plenty of room. Her mouth snapped shut, her face flushed, and she looked away, staring at her plate as if something incredibly important had just been revealed to her. It's not that, she muttered, pushing away her mashed potatoes. Jake and I need our privacy, and I need my vacation home, and I don't? I asked, but there was no answer. Then everything came crashing down like a house of cards. My parents started talking at the same time, interrupting each other, vying with each other to tell me how wrong I was, how I had disappointed them, how I didn't know how to share, how selfish I was as a grown woman, how I was an ungrateful daughter. Their voices grew louder, shriller, but I wasn't listening to them anymore. The words flew past me, leaving only noise. I stood up, slowly, unhurriedly. I picked up my purse, turned to Mark and said, I think we're done here. The next day, my phone literally exploded. Messages, calls, notifications, from Mom, from Dad, from Lily. I didn't answer, I didn't open them, I just watched as one notification followed another, some calling me selfish, others trying to make me feel guilty, reminding me how they raised me, how they helped me in my youth, how they were there when I was sick. Some, as if in desperation, begged me to reconsider, said that it was temporary, that they hadn't meant anything by it, that I had gotten it all wrong. I showed some of these messages to Mark. He watched me scroll through them silently, his lips pressed into a thin line, and then he shook his head in disbelief. I think you should block them, at least for a while, he said. I can't watch you read this. Take care of yourself first. I will, I nodded. I blocked their numbers, deleted them from social media, set limits on incoming messages. I needed space to think, to digest everything, to hear my own thoughts again, uncorrupted by other people's accusations and manipulations. And 2 weeks passed in silence, not deathly, not melancholy, blessed silence, no calls, no messages. No family drama. Mark and I settled into our normal lives, work, dinners out, grocery shopping, evening walks, the occasional get-together with friends who weren't trying to take my property under the guise of love. It was nice, calm, normal. One such evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table, looking over a new marketing campaign, a cup of green tea and the soft glow of the lamp, when my phone vibrated, a routine notification. I glanced down and immediately felt my stomach clench. It was a notification from my vacation home security system. Motion detected. The front door opened. I immediately opened the app. Someone had used a key to open the door, but they hadn't turned off the alarm. My brain immediately switched on. It wasn't Mark. It wasn't me. I hadn't let anyone in there. I knew the security company would be contacting me any second now. And sure enough, my phone rang almost immediately. "Ms. Wilson," a familiar voice said, "this is Safeguard Security. We've detected a break-in at your property on Pine Ridge Road. Is that you? Is this authorized entry?" "No," I said firmly, "I'm not there. No one is authorized to be there. Please send the police." An hour passed. I couldn't sit still. I paced the kitchen in circles, checking my phone every minute, and then it rang again. The number was the local police department. I clutched the phone in my hand. "Ms. Wilson," a voice with a slight Spanish accent said, "this is Officer Reyes. We are currently on your property on Pine Ridge Road. There are 2 people here who claim to be your parents. They have keys to the premises, but they have admitted that they do not have permission to be here," the officer said over the phone, his voice delicately polite, but there was a wariness in his voice, as if he himself did not fully understand what he was dealing with. I closed my eyes, internally slipping into that abyss where everything you do not want to hear suddenly becomes real, because yes, these were my parents, and yes, they did not have the slightest permission to be in my house. "Yes," I finally said, slowly, as if each word was an effort, "they are my parents, but they absolutely do not have permission to be in my house. Absolutely not." "I understand," the officer replied. "How do you want us to proceed?" "We can remove them from the premises, but since they used a key and did not break into the premises, the situation is not entirely clear-cut from a legal standpoint." "I'll drive there," I said. "My husband and I will. We're about an hour away." The drive was unbearably tense. Waves of anger, confusion, hurt, disbelief swirled inside me. How could they? How could they, after everything I'd said, after I'd said clearly, firmly, and directly, no, still decide to break into my house? Who does that? Who crosses the line so brazenly, so openly, and under the guise of family? When we pulled up to my country house, a police car with flashing lights greeted us. 2 officers stood in the driveway, and my parents sat on the porch like children in a corner, but suitcases and cardboard boxes were neatly stacked next to them, as if they were here for the long haul. My father stood up immediately when he saw us. "Tessa," he cried with relief, "thank God you're here. Tell those officers it was a misunderstanding. Just a stupid misunderstanding." I got out of the car without even glancing in his direction. I walked up to the officers, giving them my full attention. "Thank you for answering so quickly," I said calmly. "These are indeed my parents, but they don't have permission to be here. No one does. This house is my property." One of the officers nodded and asked, softly but clearly, "Ma'am, are you seeking a trespassing charge?" "Tessa." Mom gasped, jumping up, "You wouldn't do that, would you?" I turned, looking at her point blank, my voice icy clear. "You broke into my house after I told you straight out no. What do you think would happen?" "We didn't break in." Dad protested. "We used the key you gave us. This is all your fault." "My fault?" I repeated, raising my eyebrows. Yes. Mom screamed, no longer holding back her anger. If you'd just let us stay here. Like we hadn't planned anything. We wouldn't be standing here in front of everyone, subjected to this humiliation. I stood there, stunned, feeling the blood drain from my face. My fault? I said slowly, you gave away the house I'd been paying the mortgage on for 5 years without consulting me, then you tried to take over my vacation home without my permission, and this is my fault. Mom continued, as if she hadn't heard, you're so arrogant, so ungrateful, we raised you better, we gave you everything. Mom, stop it, I said quietly but firmly, you're embarrassing yourself right now. You and Dad just tried to move into my house after I said no outright, and now you're yelling at me in front of the police, and accusing me of being irresponsible? That seemed to get through. Mom snapped her mouth shut, though her eyes were still full of anger. I turned to the officers. I'd like to speak with you alone. We took a few steps away from the porch, away from my parents and Mark. I don't want to press charges against them, I said, keeping my voice from shaking. They're still my parents, even if they're acting so ridiculous right now, but I can't let them stay, not for one night. The officer nodded. We understand that family situations can be very difficult. We can take them to the station for a few hours, give them a stern warning about trespassing, and then let them go. Sometimes a few hours in a holding cell can be sobering, can be a good reality check. I sighed, it was cruel, but maybe this was the call they needed. Yes, please, do it. I walked back to the porch, where my parents were still sitting, like hurt children who had been left out of the party. The officers are going to take you to the police station, I said. Flatly, almost without emotion, for a few hours. I'm not pressing charges, but I want you to understand how serious this is. You can't just walk into someone else's house without permission, even if you're family. While we waited for the locksmith to change the locks, the police car with my parents drove off down the winding road into the darkness. I stood there silently, feeling not pain, not anger, but a strange, exhausting emptiness. Later, I arranged for my parents' things, the very suitcases and boxes neatly stacked by the door, to be delivered to the nearest storage facility. I paid the first month's rent and sent all the information to Lily, because my parents' numbers were still blocked. The locksmith arrived that evening, and as the shadows deepened over the house, where the weight of everything that had happened still seemed to hang in the air, he methodically and silently changed the locks, one by one, while I stood on the porch, wrapped in a cardigan, clutching a cup of now cold coffee, and looking into the darkening woods, as if searching for some explanation in them that I could not find in my own parents. By the time we left, the house was safe again, and for the first time in weeks, I felt as if there were locks not just on the doors but on those invisible boundaries inside me that I had allowed others to cross for so long. As I walked home, I felt both empty and strangely liberated, as if the enormous backpack I had carried on my back for my entire adult existence had suddenly been lifted, and I could stand up straight, take a deep breath, look straight ahead without apologizing or looking back. I knew something had changed irreversibly, not just in my family but in me as well. I had finally stood up to my parents' manipulations, I had finally said no, and most importantly, I had stayed true to myself. What do you think they'll do now? Mark asked as we approached our house, and his voice sounded less curious than cautious, as if he, too, wasn't entirely sure that it was all over. They'll probably go cry to Lily's, I sighed, leaning my forehead against the cool glass. She has a home now, let her take on the responsibility that comes with it. I'm not going to be her lifeline anymore. I had no illusions. I wasn't naive enough to believe that this was the end of it. I knew my mother. She would find a way to twist everything, to make me look like the villain, to make herself the victim. Like she always did. And I was right. A week later, I happened to open the internet just to check my coworkers' messages and saw my mother's long, carefully written post on the main feed, which had already garnered dozens of sympathetic comments from family friends, distant relatives, acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years. It began with a theatrical phrase, "Today I learned what it was like to be abandoned by my own child," and from there, everything went like clockwork. My husband and I, in our golden years, were thrown out like unwanted pets. Our eldest daughter, Tessa, called the police to evict us from her country house as if we were criminals. Now we are homeless, without support. Of course, there was no mention of the fact that they were the ones who gave their house to Lily without even consulting me. no mention of the fact that I had been paying off their mortgage for 5 years, no mention of them trying to secretly move into my country house, despite my categorical refusal. As I scrolled through the comments, reading how I was called heartless, cruel, ungrateful, something inside me snapped. Something that had been clinging to the remnants of hope for reconciliation. And then I started typing my own post, not to justify myself, but because if our family was going to be a topic of discussion, it was time to tell the whole story. Up until now, I had kept quiet about family matters. I believed that personal things should remain personal, but since my mother decided to put our situation on display, I no longer find it possible to stay on the sidelines. Here are the facts that were conveniently omitted from her post. For the past 5 years, I have been paying the mortgage on my parents' house. They couldn't afford it, my dad's work hours were cut, my mom had health problems. I didn't do it under duress, I did it because they are my family, because I wanted to help. I didn't complain, I didn't remind them, I just paid. 3 weeks ago, at my younger sister Lily's wedding, which I also partially paid for, my parents announced that they were giving Lily this very house, the very one that I paid for. They did it solemnly, in front of everyone, without warning, without permission, without even a word with me. And then, a few days later, they said they wanted to move into my country house, the house I bought myself, before I got married, working nights, weekends, denying myself everything. They had discussed it all with Lily beforehand. She would get their house, and I was supposed to just give them mine, no questions asked. When I refused, they tried to move in anyway, used the spare key, set off the alarm, so the police showed up. I didn't arrest them, like my mother said, I didn't file a report. I asked the police to politely remove them from my property. Then I put their things in storage and paid for the first month, because, after all, they are my parents. If they still need space, maybe they should come to Lily. She has a 4-bedroom house now, thanks to them, and to me, because I paid for it. And finally, I wrote. I've always tried to be a good daughter, tried to help, to support, to do what's right, but I won't let myself be taken advantage of. I won't let myself be made out to be a villain for not giving up my last possession after all I've done. Family isn't about demands, it's about mutual respect, about boundaries, about honesty, and not about taking and taking. Because we're family, I'm tired of being silent. I'm tired of being convenient. This is my truth. I hit publish before I could doubt it. Mark, standing next to me, read the text over my shoulder, said nothing, but a moment later I saw his finger click on the heart. The response followed almost instantly, as if the very second my post appeared in the feed, the people on the other side of the screen were waiting for their chance to say their word, and they did. The comments started pouring in, from cousins, aunts, uncles, even some of my parents' friends, the ones who had stood by their side for years, sitting next to them at family gatherings, sharing memories, and now suddenly writing words filled with support and sympathy, but unlike the comments under my mother's post, where every sentence was a stab in the back, these were soft, honest, and unexpectedly warm. I had no idea you were paying their mortgage. Wait, did they really give away the house you were paying for? That's so unfair, Tessa, you deserve better. I should have felt vindicated, should have felt triumphant, satisfied, but mostly I just felt tired, deep and viscous, like after a long illness. The whole situation had worn me down to the limit, and even the fact that I was defending myself rather than attacking didn't make it enjoyable. I never wanted to air my dirty laundry in public, but the silence was becoming unbearable. 2 days later, my cousin Jessica called. We rarely spoke, but now there was genuine concern in her voice. Hi, she said carefully, I just wanted to check in on you. I heard your parents were trying to get back to, well, Lily's house. I sat up straight, as if my back had reacted before my conscious mind. Really? Yes, apparently, she sighed. They came to her, with suitcases, with boxes, asking to be let in, saying they had no place to live anymore, but she said it was her home now, that there was no room for them there. I was silent, absorbing every word, until the image of my parents standing on the threshold of the very house they had given Lily, waiting for shelter, and Lily, my little sister, politely but firmly closing the door in their faces, came into my mind. Now they live in some crappy apartment, Jessica continued, and your mother, I think, has gone back to work full-time to pay the rent. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me thought it was fair, that it was a logical consequence of their own decisions, that they had created this situation themselves. But another part of me, quieter, but still alive, felt something akin to pain, sympathy. They were my parents, after all. After we hung up, I told Mark what Jessica had said. He sighed and said simply, "Karma, yeah," I said, "but somehow I don't feel as satisfied as I thought I would." He shrugged. "That's because you're a good person, Tessa, unlike, well, you know who." Over the next few weeks, my parents tried to contact me. I saw their names on the phone screen a few times, Mom, Dad, and each time my finger hovered over the button, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I wasn't ready, the pain was still too fresh, and I knew that hearing their voices would make my heart flutter again. One night, as Mark and I were getting ready for bed, he turned out the light and suddenly asked, "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive them?" I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking about it. Maybe, someday, not for them, for myself, because carrying around so much anger is ultimately harmful. And Lily, I sighed, it's harder with her. She knew, she was part of it, and then, when they came to her for help, she turned her back on them, just closed the door. Although, maybe I can't judge her. "At least you know where you stand now," Mark said, hugging me. "No more illusions about who's important to them and who's not." He was right. As painful as this whole experience was, it tore away the veil of illusion, smashed into pieces the image of family I'd clung to since my youth. I spent years trying to earn their acceptance, their praise, their pride, trying to be as special as Lily, but now I knew, it never had been and never would be, and, strangely, this knowledge was liberating. The next morning, I saw another missed call from my mother. This time, I turned on voicemail. Her voice was different, quieter, softer, less demanding. "Tessa," she said, "we made a big mistake. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but please, call us back, we need to talk." I looked at the phone, felt my heart clench, and deleted the message, not because I didn't care, but because I wasn't ready yet. Maybe one day I'd be ready to hear their apology, if there really was one. Maybe one day I'd allow myself to let them back into my life, but only on new terms, with clear boundaries. But not today. Today, I was still learning to put myself first, to do what I should have done all those years ago. As for my vacation home, I decided to rent it out. The extra income would be helpful, of course, but more importantly, I liked the idea that this place, my once cherished corner of solitude, would no longer sit empty, no longer silently remind me of betrayal and pain, but would once again be filled with life, voices, light. It would become a home, not for anyone in particular, but for myself, and maybe somewhere in that was my own personal new start.